Welcome to On the Bookshelf. I'm Pete Solomon. In this edition, we'll discuss the book Stone Angels. It's the story of Augustine Shaw, a young man going through college, learning to be a man, the people in his orbit, and ultimately his guilt. Stone Angels by Michael Hartigan. And now, from the author, here's an excerpt.
I couldn't help but get nervous after another 10 minutes went by with no gas station. The emergence of a soft but urgent ding 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 that began emanating from the dashboard did not help. That little orange light wasn't kidding around anymore. My practical questions quickly diverged toward paranoia. Did I have my AAA card? Would a tow truck find us? Would a service station be open this late at night, this far away from real civilization? What if the tow truck driver was suspect? Would I call 911, or was that too extreme? If not, did I even know what number to call for assistance? I instinctively pulled my cell phone from the center console and checked the service bars. Full, thank God. Apparently, whatever southern municipality we trekked across was in tune enough with the 21st century to have erected a cell tower. That was good, in case the tow truck driver happened to be a serial killer. I had to chuckle at myself. Nothing had even happened yet, and already I thought of the worst possible scenario. Something straight out of a low-budget horror movie. This sort of thinking spoke to the doubts I had about my own ability to handle a potential crisis situation, which was actually not that foolish, considering the crises I had dealt with in the past and their horrifying outcomes. Regardless of my failing confidence, the only choice I had was to continue on the current path and hope the blue highway sign was no liar. Hope the fumes we coasted on lasted just a few minutes more. Turning around wasn't feasible. I doubted I had enough fuel to make it back to the interstate. Besides, I had no idea how far away the next exit was or whether or not I'd face the same problem there. I had to hope the gas station promised me would rise out of the darkness like an emerald city, ready to fulfill my needs. But I didn't need a brain, a heart, or courage. I needed gas. Gas to help me get home. 5 more minutes went by, the dinging grew more frequent. My body tensed. Then suddenly the road was smoother. A few yards later it curved. I must have understood a change in road condition to mean a change in luck. Here was the bend I was looking for. At the same time, the dinging from the dashboard got faster and louder. It was telling me this was it, the last push. We weren't even riding on fumes anymore, just lingering particles. Some people might have stopped then. I usually would have stopped then. But for some reason, adrenaline stopped me from stopping. Subconsciously, I increased the speed of the Explorer. The dinging hurried and I sped up more, trying to keep up with its urgent pace and maybe beat it to the gas station I was sure existed. It had to, right up around the bend. I instinctively psyched myself up. My body reacted naturally, my pulse quickened. My body arched forward in the driver's seat, knuckles white gripped around the steering wheel. I came alive. The hours of driving in virtual silence and darkness slipped away like the blurred pines lining the road. Words of someone I once loved flashed behind my eyes. Before this is over, I'm going to lighten you up. I'm going to make you come alive, she had said to me. Amen to that. Screw my cracking wall, screw my sleeping friends in the car, screw that serial killer tow truck driver. If I were going to break down on a backcountry road, I'd at least get a thrill doing it. If I were going to open myself up to failure, I'd do it speeding around a hairpin turn. One gradual curve right, followed by a wide arc to the left, then a 20-yard uphill straightaway. At the top, I sped through another curve left around an especially looming group of dark pines at 50 miles an hour. Quick S-bend, my pulse quickened, and another wide, sweeping turn to the right. Was that perspiration on my forehead? A hard right, sharp left, the speedometer fluttered excitedly. We spit out onto another straightaway, and 10 yards ahead, the road dropped down over the horizon like a cliff. Without hesitation, I took the Explorer over the top, hitting 65. As the car reached the hill and came into its descent, a sliver of silver moonlight split the clouds above, high beams from heaven. All at once, the full expanse of the road and the decline ahead was visible. The black curtain parted, and I saw down below, nestled at the bottom of the hill, a dimly lit gas station. The moonlight, mixed with its orange fluorescent bulbs, gave it an eerie green, almost emerald glow. My head, now full of adrenaline, still throbbed. There was respite ahead, but we were still lost. Maybe clarity was up ahead, too.
An excerpt from the novel Stone Angels, read by the author, Michael Hartigan. And Michael joins us now and on the bookshelf. Thank you very much for coming. I've read that the genesis of the idea for this book began when you were a student at Providence College. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how the book evolved?
Sure, absolutely, and thank you for having me. Appreciate the chance. Yeah, sure, the book began a little over 10 years ago when I was a student at Providence College down in Rhode Island. And I had, as a freshman, as a sophomore, I had been, I would like to write. I've always been a writer, and I would write stories and little vignettes about things that I was seeing, and, fictionalized, of course, but sort of the themes of college. And I soon realized I was writing sort of the same narrative. I was writing the same characters. They had different names, they had different, attributes, but they were the same characters, and I sort of wove them together and realized I was really writing one narrative, and that's sort of where it came from.
They say that writers often picture real people as they create their characters. Sometimes they're composites of real people. Was that the case in your book?
Well, it's fiction, and the characters do some bad things, so legally I should say no. It has nothing to do with me. But yeah, of course, and some of the bits and pieces of people I know. Sometimes the people we know are much more unique and strange than any fiction you can come up with. Yeah, absolutely. There's bits and pieces of people. There is one character, the best friend of the main character is very much one of my closest friends from college, and anyone that knows me knows that person knows right away who that is.
And did he know he was Ben?
Yes. No, Shoddy, the character Shoddy,
sure.
yes, is very much based on one of my close friends, and he put his stamp of approval on it, and he was okay with it. So
Good. Good. Was Stone Angels the original title?
No, it went through several titles. Like I said, I started writing it way back when, and it sort of went in a drawer, and would come out every once in a while, and I would dust it off. And it started with just no title, and then it went to confession, because it's essentially about a confession, and written in that format. And then it went through various versions of that. I even threw the Providence College motto, Veritas, on there and made that the title at one point. But when I submitted it to the competition that it ended up winning, I wanted to give it a little bit more of a meaningful title, and I dove back into the book and pulled out Stone Angels.
We should talk about the competition. It's a real challenge for any writer to have his or her first work published. And yours came about because you entered and won a competition. You were named the 2015 Outstanding Writer by Middlesex Media, and not only did they bestow this honor on you, but they helped you publish the book, didn't they?
Right. Yeah. It was. It wasn't something, like I said. It was, my book had been. I had taken it out every once in a while, and I would work on it, and it was a final product. And I never really understood the publishing industry or really tried to break into it. But a friend of mine was on the company, or the publishing company's email list, and they got an email about this competition they run, and she knew I was a writer and suggested I enter. I never really thought of it, but it gave me reason to really take the book out and polish up the manuscript. I entered it in, and it won the competition back. And Merrimack Media, the company that did the competition, turned around and said, "We're going to publish your book."
So the contest helped you polish your manuscript, but your daughter helped you finish it, didn't she?
Yeah. I have a 3-year-old, and I like I said, I've always been a writer, but I like to really sort of. I write for her sometimes too, and I write kids' books for her every year, and still trying to figure out the kids' book industry, which is a whole other area than novels. But just sort of having her around, and it gave me reason to really kind of want to take this jump and finish up my book, which is obviously not for her, and maybe someday she'll read it when she's an adult. And but yeah, she's pretty motivational.
I have to ask, you were educated at St. John's Prep and Providence College before you got your master's degree at Boston University. Did your Catholic education and Catholic upbringing impact the main character, Augustine Shaw's sensibilities?
Well, it's a story about guilt. So, being a good Catholic boy, yes, it's being a good Catholic boy, and having gone through, a private Catholic high school at St. John's Prep in Danvers, and but which I believe your state rep from around here now was a classmate of mine,
Really?
Joe Boncory.
Sure.
And so the that sort of education, that's where I learned to write really and do well. But the that sort of background is sort of built into the story, and guilt is such a huge theme.
We talked about your being a writer, and you mentioned the fact that it was something you'd always wanted to do, but you've shown a real versatility in your writing. You've been a reporter. You'd been a public information officer for the Middlesex Sheriff's Department, and now you serve as the communications director for Nikki Tsongas, the Democratic congressperson who represents a district that is very impactful in our Commonwealth. So these are different types of writing, but is there one thread that as a writer you have to adhere to?
Well, I think it's, like you mentioned, I'm a journalist by trade. Went to Boston University for communications and a journalism degree, master's degree. But I think what that taught me was the importance of every word, and sort of making sure that, every word, every sentence means something. And, your story doesn't have to be too much flourish if it doesn't need to be. I really like description. I really like to get into my characters. But I was at Providence College actually talking to a class a couple months ago, and one of they asked me something similar, and I said, don't use 10 words when 3 words will do. If you can use the right words, that means more. And I think journalism taught me that in terms of word count and in terms of really having to take complex subjects and boil them down for public consumption and public understanding. That's sort of helped me, and I think that sort of runs through my fiction writing, my nonfiction travel writing, and even my kids' book. Anything I do, I think I sort of take that lesson with me.
Now, we talked about your involvement with a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, but also you were a part of a successful mayoral campaign in Malden. Might politics be in your future?
Oh, no, I'm a behind-the-camera kind of guy, except for right now, which is contradictory.
You're in front of the camera.
Right. But, I've always enjoyed politics. I've been involved since I was, I can remember in middle school being, running for student government, things like that. But
did you win?
No, but I do appreciate I appreciate it very much, and I much prefer being behind the camera.
Let's talk a little bit about the characters, and we talked briefly about Augustine Shaw, who's the main character in the book Stone Angels. Right. I know people ask you this all the time, but authors get this question all the time. How much of Augustine Shaw came out of your life?
I think a good bit. I mean, I like I said about with other characters and people I think any writer that says they don't pull from their own experiences is lying, of course. And so much of the setting and the timeline of the book, the timing of the book, comes from because I was there while I was writing it. So it's hard not to infuse characters with and infuse the story with my own experiences and some of the the things that Augustine goes through, or even just some of the fun things that he sees. There's a scene where the students are out in a snowstorm out back, flying down one of the hills on lunch trays. That's something that I could write well about, because I remember standing there watching that exact thing play out behind my dorm room. Now, did I get into a brawl and almost murder someone behind a bar? No, but the themes and things are definitely, bits and pieces of my own life.
This brings us to the question. The title of the book, of course, is Stone Angels, but the characters in the book aren't always angels. Did you get any sort of negative feedback from your alma mater? No. They,
I actually was just back there in October. They did an alumni author series, and they had, it was their 100th year, actually, the centennial of Providence College, and they brought back, they've been doing several different things, like, bringing alumni back, and I was part of 4 authors that they brought back, and we had a full day on campus. I spoke to a class. I met with some teachers that I had previously that had been my professors. I got to sit in on some other meetings and things like that and speak, and then at the end we had a big panel discussion in front of an auditorium full of students and faculty, and got to read some of the book and present our story, and so it was and they're selling it in the bookstore. So, maybe they haven't read it yet, but.
Who were some of the other authors who graduated from Providence College?
There's a law professor out in the Midwest, and she writes mostly legal books. There's a young man who was a year behind me who does actually some Catholic writings, but it's actually humorous, and that was nice. And there was another novelist there who was actually a professor at the college, and she was there too.
Interesting. Interesting. We talked briefly about Augustine Shaw, and we'll come back to him, but
Sure.
The characters are really well drawn, and I think it's a book that moves along because the characters are so real. There probably couldn't be two women more different than Lindsay and Emily. Could you talk about how you created those characters?
Sure, yeah. I think, characters for me are very, that's where I like to get into my writing. And like I said, I like to do description. I like to get into detail, but I think it's really nice to be dropped into the mind of somebody and really get to know how a character ticks. And with the two main women in the book, I wanted to make sure that they were very different. And Augustine falls in love with them both, but in different ways. One of them is an infatuation, and the other is built on a very long friendship that has been there for a long time. And so, does he ever really love either of them is kind of up in the air. And that's sort of part of why he feels guilty about what ultimately happens to them.
If you can figure out how women think, you're a much better man than I.
Yeah. No, this is my version of how women think. And I can't imagine it's anywhere near the truth, but I don't know. I'll ask my wife and she'll tell me if I'm anywhere close. She hasn't given me too much criticism, so maybe I'm close enough in the fictional world anyway.
You do a great job of capturing the camaraderie of college life.
Yeah, and that's part of, that's also part of the story, and friendship and loyalty is sort of an undercurrent because the main character, Augustine, the main character, and the main antagonist, Duncan, begin as friends, and they, that's sort of a tenuous relationship too. Is it really based off of real friendship? Augustine thinks so, but as time goes on, he realizes that really isn't as strong a bond as he may think it is. But juxtaposed to someone like Shoddy, the character I mentioned earlier, who is loyal almost to a fault, and sort of making those two comparisons there, and then dropping them into the college scene where everyone's sort of coming to their own in college. That's sort of, you're trying to find yourself, you're trying to find out who you're going to be for the rest of your life and as adults, and that's, that has to do with your relationships as well.
We'll get to the rivalry between Augustine and Duncan in a moment, but I want to go back to Augustine and the cheating scandal that he's peripherally involved in, his not wanting to, for lack of a better phrase, rat anybody out, speaks volumes about his sensibilities.
Yeah, and I think that's the loyalty, like we just talked about, is very much built in him, and it comes from having been sort of thrown for a loop by someone like Duncan, who he thought was a loyal friend, and instead of someone, you can go different ways when someone cheats on you or someone treats you poorly. You can either, say, forget it, I'm done with this, and walk away from loyalty or friendship. But you could go the way Augustine goes, and you can sort of embrace this loyalty as the epitome, and that's sort of what he does, and he values very much not being a rat and not telling people, not getting people in trouble.
Some of what Duncan does in high school might be attributable to immaturity, but once he gets to college and winds up rooming with Augustine, there comes a point where you wonder how much Augustine can take before he snaps.
Right, and there are plenty of immature people in college too. I mean, that's there's plenty of immaturity flying around every college campus.
Yes, I wish you weren't looking at me when you said that.
But yeah, it's Duncan pushes all the right buttons because he does know Augustine well, and he knows what will get him, and he knows what will really irk him in the right ways. So you do wonder, how much is Augustine going to take before he snaps? And it's not right away in the book, but in the timeline of the story, because the timeline's a little bit fractured. It's not just a straight through linear narrative. In the timeline, it is relatively early on where Augustine does sort of finally get fed up.
We don't know too much about Augustine as a student, but we do know he's a pretty good student, takes it seriously.
Yep.
Conversely, his foe, Duncan, does not, sort of tries to skate by, not always successfully.
Yep.
This juxtaposition is an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I think Augustine, it comes from, and there's a lot of, blue-collar, gritty New England themes in this book, and there's a lot of dichotomy between that and maybe some more well-to-do students who take things for granted. Augustine comes at it from a place of wanting to prove himself and wanting to live up to the expectations of his parents, who worked really hard to get him to college, and that's where he comes from. Whereas Duncan sort of goes the opposite direction and sort of takes it for granted and sort of just says, forget it, I don't need to live up to anybody's standards.
We should talk for just a moment about Augustine's parents, because they're hardworking, middle-class people. They're very proud of what Augustine is trying to accomplish.
Right.
They really have a lot to do with how Augustine was formed, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's, that comes from my own upbringing, and growing up in Massachusetts, and that was instilled in me, and that's sort of the foundation of Augustine's character. The book, the theme of guilt runs through the whole book, and that's sort of, where does that come from? And I think it starts as he's growing up, and he's taught to do the right thing, and he's taught to always sort of look out for those who he cares about and stand up for what he thinks is right. And when those tenets are challenged as he gets older, and he gets into an atmosphere where things are sort of thrown into his face that have never been thrown into his face before, you see him struggling with that. And it's left sort of to the reader at the end. Did he follow through with what he believes in?
Michael Hartigan is our guest on The Bookshelf. The novel we're talking about is Stone Angels. This might be an opportune time for another reading.
Sure, sounds good. This is chapter 28. The old westerns followed some pretty standard archetypal patterns when it came to endings. Two cowboys would meet under a hazy high-noon sun, dry and dust-covered in their raggedy hats and spurred boots. If he wasn't John Wayne, he was Clint Eastwood. If he wasn't Clint Eastwood, he was about to die. A tumbleweed or two would always dance past, lightly kissing the dirt as it skipped across the line of fire, oblivious to the tangible, dense air that smelled like impending death, if impending death had a smell. The two arch-enemies would stare each other down. Perhaps the camera would close up on the rigid, determined eyes set deep into a cracked, parched, and morally vacant face, until one flinched. Then, with a leathery snap and a metallic crackle, one would fall, slowly and lifelessly, and explode the dusty ground, disappearing for the last time in a hazy cloud of dirt and desperation. The other, the winner, rode off into the sunset, a hero to the beleaguered townspeople and an icon to a satisfied audience. But that's Hollywood, old Hollywood, and it may not even exist anymore. Behind Primal Bar, on a cold, damp, morally vacant March night, it definitely did not exist. There was a less than epic showdown. There was no sun, just moon. There were no hats or boots, just collared shirts and jeans smeared with mud and dried blood. It was not scheduled. It was not witnessed. There were no citizens besieged by the bad guy. There was no audience salivating for good to triumph over evil. There was no prize or pride to be won. Honor was suffocated by the stench. Dignity buzzed with the flies in the dumpster. The midnight moon broke from behind the clouds and lit up the alley behind Primal like it was midday. Consumed the single bulb above the doorway, and in an instant revealed the sunken mass of a human, hunched over on the grimy pavement in a pool of his own sick and self-pity. My eyes adjusted to the moonlight, enough to fully take in my surroundings. I recognized my reflection broken into a dozen shards in the puddle between my knees. My eyes were set deep, and even in the liquid mirror seemed dry, tired, and fragile. A few crumpled sections from a week-old Providence journal skidded across the wet asphalt alley, pushed along by the steady March breeze that also carried the incoherent smell of rotting garbage. I thought, perhaps that is what impending death smelled like. A myriad of disregarded junk that at one time meant something to somebody. A rat sprinted from a corner, skirted the edge of light where the shadows began and disappeared behind the dumpster. Whether it was the rat, my reflection, or the moonlight illumination that distracted me, I never heard the footsteps and the wheezy, heavy breathing behind me until I felt the pain they accompanied. Duncan's bony fist cracked into the back of my head, just above the base of my neck, and sent my already kneeling body sprawling forward. My broken, puddled face kissed my broken, fleshy face as I crashed headfirst into whatever fluids had concocted on the alley ground in front of me. I never had time to put my hands out to brace the impact. "I'll kill you," Duncan wheezed. His breathing was intermittent. I assumed the broken nose contributed to that. It also made him sound like he had the flu and was every now and then playing a slide whistle. "Get up and fight." Still on all fours, I peered over my shoulder and saw blood coagulating under his swollen nose, a wad of toilet paper protruding from one nostril. Instantly, he swung his foot like a Brazilian soccer player into my ribs. My entire body hiccuped, and I collapsed onto my back. Duncan wasted no time taking advantage of the upside-down tortoise position. Took a short stride forward and drove his foot into my right kidney. The dull thuds pushed all the air from my lungs and up through my mouth in the form of a long, low
The book is Stone Angels. The author is Michael Hartigan. I'm Pete Solomon, and this is On the Bookshelf. The door's open for a sequel to this, isn't it?
I think so. I'm in the process of writing my next novel, and I'm saying it's in the same universe. So some of the characters will carry over, but it's not necessarily a direct sequel. That may come a little bit later.
How much older are they in the novel you're working on?
A few years older. Yeah.
Is there the possibility that Augustine might have to pay for his sins?
The next book will deal with whether he has to pay for them or not, and what he had to do, and he'll pop up and you'll know what he's doing now.
Is it easier to work on a second book than it was the first?
No. It's a lot more fun because I do have a clear story of what I want to tell, and whereas this sort of came in bits and pieces.
Sometimes authors will tell you the characters sort of surprise them. They write themselves. Was that the case in this?
Yeah, some of them did. A couple of the characters definitely did write themselves, yeah.
It's been a delight having the opportunity to talk to you about
absolutely.
what is a very compelling book, Stone Angels. Our guest has been Michael Hartigan. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. And thank you for being with us on the Bookshelf.